Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm Dear Darling, and shall we see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhallow today in a late night episode. But you can probably tell by the title that we are talking about another Crab's Treasure. Today I've sat down, I thought about it, what do I think about the game? I've done some reflection, and yeah, I like the game. I think it was essentially my first foray into a Souls-like genre, Souls-like game. So I'm not going to say it's particularly, my opinion might be representative of the average, because I haven't played any From Software game or anything like it, so just bear that in mind that this is very subjective and me based. Anyway, good evening everyone, I'm here with a late night broadcast. I hope I can make it through this. Right now in Fawnhallow, it's 12:06 AM on what should be Sunday, 10th of August 2025. I've been doing a lot of episodes past midnight recently, but it's been busy. What am I going to talk about? Not what am I going to talk about, like what am I going to start? I know what I'm going to talk about. So yeah, I'll warn you before I get into any spoilers. I would say that there are some, it's not so much story spoilers in the sense, I don't think your situation will be ruined if you haven't played the game and you got spoiled on the story. But I think I would say it probably is better to not be spoiled in this story compared to being spoiled. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter as much in this case, because I think story is a pretty interesting central role in it, and it's more so the natural discovery of things rather than plot points, which makes the spoilers kind of feel bad, I would say. So anyway, what do I think about Another Crab's Treasure? I liked it, I think. It is a game which, on a mechanical level, is a lot of fun. It has, basically, it's a From Software sort of Souls-like game, so these very challenging bosses that you have to fight, like resource, like sort of management on like a micro scale rather than a macro scale. And yeah, you sort of like explore around and you do your best to survive these deadly bosses. If you die, then you drop your soul and you have to go back. It's that sort of game. If you played any of the Dark Souls, if you played something like Hollow Knight, you'll probably pick up the vibe of it. So, I played obviously difficult games, but more like difficult Metroidvanias, more so than something like Another Crab's Treasure. So this is my first foray into it. I would say that I liked it. I like the boss battles and I like the combat, feels quite nice, but as expected, I don't jive with the exploration. But that's because I don't really jive with exploration in general, I would say. It's not Another Crab's Treasure's fault, it's just I don't care too much for exploration parts of games. I like it from going point A to point B, but then having to sort of like go from point A to point B while exploring every sort of nook and cranny or trying to find X, Y, and Z is a bit tiresome to me. But luckily there's not too much of that, I think, in this game. Most of the game is actually just sort of, like, the optional exploration is optional, as expected. So, the mechanics of a game, and the one which I think is its sort of lifeblood, and makes it very interesting, and probably makes it much more accessible, I assume, compared to other Souls-like genres, is the fact that this entire central mechanic is sort of enshrined within the shell switching mechanic. You basically, shells are your equipment. You equip different shells, that's how you get different abilities, that's how you get different properties within the shell, that's how you, you know, your armor gets depleted, it's your like effective health bar, secondary health bar. And it makes up a very big important part of the gameplay, to be honest. So, with that, it's very interesting, I would say. It's like, I think myself being very guilty of this, I'm very much someone who, once I find like a loadout I like, I don't change that loadout. You know, I experiment a little bit, I try different things here and there, and then I find the thing which I'm like, this is the one I'm sticking with, and that's it. I lock in, basically, just do that. Sometimes I don't even experiment with it. It kind of depends on what the resource cost is for experimentation. I did it with Cuphead, I did it with Hollow Knight, etc, etc. But I think this game kind of wants you to branch out. It wants you to basically be like, hey, why don't you try some different things? Because it uses a shell mechanic, and not it's not forced a lot of the time. Like there's very few times I think throughout the game where it's like you have to use this shell to do it, to fight this boss. Like you never have to do it in combat. It's always like a puzzle mechanic or something. But it basically encourages you to try and sort of use different shells, because you can't block everything forever, essentially. Blocking will always chip away at a bit of a shell, so you can't keep it up forever. Eventually your shell will break if you don't perfect parry everything, and then you'll have to basically switch your shell to grab a new one and continue the process again. And it actually, when it works well, I think it has a really sort of nice, fun playstyle of sort of dipping in and out, parrying, and then as your shell health starts sort of eroding away, you dive into a different shell. You have a different, not extremely different playstyle, but a somewhat different playstyle, where like the shell has a different durability or weight to it, or different ability in the first place, which makes it fun. It makes it dynamic, makes it interesting. It makes, I think, the boss fights especially very thrilling, in the sense, especially when like the enemy just breaks your shell and you're like, okay, you're scrambling to get a new one while you're basically defenseless. That sort of dynamic feeling is pretty cool, I think, in a game. And I think the active encouragement of it allows for more experimentation, and it doesn't like force you to do it. Like you can still brute force if you want with a thimble, using one shell over and over and over again, but it's still encouraged, and you find out a lot of other shells that are useful in a lot of different other situations. You sort of dive around the boss arenas, which have a load of different shells with different abilities. Like some will be helpful to heal you, some will be a bit more defensive, some will pack a punch, stuff like that. And mechanically, I think it's a very like nice system. I can't remember if you start with a parry in the game. I think maybe you have to unlock the parry. I can't remember, but the parry really opens up the entire game. To be able to, you have a shield button, and that will basically block the damage entirely, but at the cost of your shell health. Or you can try and parry it by releasing the shield at perfect timing. Similar to a lot of parries, I think, especially in fighting games. You basically have to give up your block for it, so if you do get hit, it's even more punishing. You do that to try and parry things. Parrying by far and away is the best thing to do if you can do it, and to be fair, in a lot of cases it's actually not too difficult, I would say, because a lot of the bosses have mostly quite well telegraphed attacks. There are some attacks which I think probably are like too quick, but there's not that many which are like crazy, and it even telegraphs like two special types of attacks, like shell breaking attacks, which if you choose to block it instead of parrying or dodging it, will completely wreck your shell. Not completely, but do a heavy damage to your shell. And unblockables, which can't be blocked, have to be dodge rolled. That makes it interesting. I think it gives you sort of like different options within the game, and forces you to keep on your toes about the different ways you can sort of attack and fight. The actual mechanics, like umami, I think is cool as a resource. It's basically your mana, and you use it to cast either shell spells, which can be a lot of fun, or use it to cast like these other magical abilities. I forget what they're called, adaptations, right? Which are also kind of fun, but I didn't really go for umami builds. I didn't really experiment with them too much. Some seem pretty difficult to utilize, but maybe I'm just not skillful enough. So for a more mechanic gameplay, I think it's got a lot going for it. It's got a tight base, which makes the rest of the game very sort of fun in that sense. I think aesthetically, the game works pretty well. It's basically like a very sort of colourful, like kids' cartoon sort of take almost on a Souls-like. It's very cheerful, bright, colourful worlds, and the environments in Another Crafted Treasure are by far and away my favourite part of the game. It's so amazing, like the creativity they use to be able to create like these to create these environments all based around trash, essentially. There's a lot of times where I looked at it and I was like, that's a really creative like enemy type. Like I'm trying to think of a good one off the top of my head, but they'll like use like, there's different types of a basic enemy. One of them is like a fencer, because it uses like a cocktail stick and it has a shot glass on its head. One uses like a cocktail umbrella or something, and it like uses it as a shield. And like, it's very like nice and cool how they design things. There's a lot of very small details as well, about how they come together to make the aesthetic of something. You know, like there's like a guillotine executioner enemy which uses a bike lock as a guillotine. I'm like, it looks really, really cool, these sort of things. Its environmental design in Lovecraft Treasure is fantastic. It's brilliant. I love it so much. It really leans into the aesthetic of let's use trash to basically define the entire world. It's wonderful. So its aesthetics, I think, is really, really good. Its music is pretty good as well. I think the boss themes definitely are the best, but my favourite being a late game boss. I would just say its name, Petrock, if you know it. That's not a spoiler, because that name shouldn't spoil you, hopefully. But that's my favourite boss theme. It's very sort of grungy, is what I'd describe it as. But yeah, aesthetic works pretty well. It's meant to... It has, like... And we're sort of getting into story and vibe here, but its atmosphere is interesting because it's ultimately, the story itself is one which touches upon many topics, you know, like rampant capitalism, exploitation, class divide. It touches onto a lot of environmental factors, you know, the destruction of a world, the powerlessness feeling of the average person, you know, like ignorance and inaction, I suppose. It has a lot of different themes which all play together into the same package, and it does really, really well, I think, at leaning into that aesthetic, that theme, and basically ticking off every single box. You know, the currency in the game is microplastics, obviously a very sort of, not a dig, but obviously a sort of like a joke, but I'm not sure joke's the right word, but reference to, you know, the pollution of the ocean. You use a fork to attack with, and you smelt down keys or something together to reinforce your fork. A lot of the accessories you use, which is sort of like your badges, your equipment, are like, I forget what they're called off the top of my head, but you know, like things like barnacles, you know, which like attach to the side of fish, and like whales or something to hitch a ride. It's all very in keeping with its thematic, and it leans heavily into it, and it does a great job at it. And I think its story is pretty good as well. I think it's sort of, it's a bit interesting because it sort of seesaws back, but it's sort of like, I would say it's a serious core with a funny coat of paint over the top, kind of. I would say from this point onwards, I would say spoilers are anything could be spoiled in this game, so just be careful. I'm going to be spoiling literally anything and everything about this game. But it's sort of like, a lot of the times the discussion is pretty serious. Like, there's a serious discussion where Firth is starting to realise, oh, the exploitation. Roland is not like such a good person. He's starting to see the errors of Roland's ways, where it's just sort of like, oh, you know, hold on, he's exploiting the class. Like, why doesn't he do something about this? This is messed up. And then also it dives into a really nice conversation between Nema and Grill about, you know, like, what's your motivation for doing this? Like, I want to actually make a difference about this. You can be ignorant, because Krill is sort of just like, I just want things to go back to the way when things were simpler, when I didn't know about all the horrors which were going on in the world. And then Noah very fairly calls out, well, you can't blame that, you know, you can't hide in your shell forever. You know about them now. What good does going back into ignorance do for you at this point? You got to be able to face them, you know. It's cowardly to hide behind. It's not cowardly to be afraid and unsure what to do, but it's cowardly to pretend it doesn't exist, essentially. And Nema, by the way, absolutely goated character. She's by far and away my favourite NPC of a game. I think of Moonsnail is second, just because of how goofy they end up being. And yeah, she just sort of gives some hard truths, but then she also acts like quite a maternal figure, where she's like, okay, you know, sorry, Krill, for going off on you, but you know, it's difficult for her, you know, from like a working class or whatever. She's worried about the future of her children, etc., etc. And they reconcile. They have some like really hard-hitting conversations in here. There's some like a lot of hard-hitting lore as well, or things like the eel, I forgot her name, Voltai or whatever, just being a regular non-electric eel, but basically being body modified and forced into being an electric eel to power Roland's capitalist dreams and desires. A very fascinating sort of dive where you think Roland and capitalism is the primary enemy you're facing, but then also it goes on into revealing more and more worlds. Like when I saw the Bleached Kingdom, I was like, whoa. And the unfathomable is really, really cool to sort of represent the hero's journey as well, where really the discussion is capitalism is evil as well, but there's also a lot of inaction which happens as well. Not blaming Krill, but sort of feeding upon his like downward spiral in a way of being like, you were just ignorant before and you want to go back to that ignorance instead of facing the dangers. It should make you angry, leading into Prior Dubia as a boss and feeding off a character who has shown that anger at the injustice in the world. Titan, who is probably my second favourite character. Actually, sorry, Moon's now your third. So there's a lot of like very interesting commentary going on, and it comes to a conclusion at the end, which I think sort of marries its both hopeful nature and hopeless nature. The fact that it's got such a sort of brutal game core with such like a bright coat of paint over the top. Well, basically it kind of just is quite nihilistic in a way, where it's like the world is in a bad place and it's just getting worse because of things which are out of your control. But there are still things which you can do to help the world. But, you know, it takes more than just one person to change a world on its own, essentially. So it's sort of like very nihilistic in a way, but also not inspiring. But it's more about surviving in a way and how exhausting it is. It certainly made me reflect and think of it. It's not like I was listening to a game being like, whoa, I've never thought about these things before. I agree with a lot of what the game is saying. But it is difficult. You know, it's difficult to understand the place in it. It's difficult to understand how to influence, impact, etc. All of these things. But I think it does a pretty good job of getting its message across. I think a lot of the times it undermines itself as well by taking a very comedic tone to a lot of these things. Firth, I thought, was really genuinely an interesting character. You know, one who seems antagonistic to the protagonist because he's sort of just like a, don't worry, I'll make it big sort of thing in a way. And then he sees the exploitation of capitalism, of people who have made it big. And he's like, this isn't right, we got to change it. And then he falls deeper into the sort of hole when he realizes he can't be one of them. He can't make it big anymore. And then he kind of like has a very comedic sort of rise to being the final boss, where he's just like, whoa, this is so cool. But it kind of makes sense because then he gets all the power and he's like, don't worry, I'll fix it. I'll fix things, you know. I'll make the trickle down system actually work. Well, this time now I'm the one at the top. But then it sort of like undermines itself where it's like, okay, well, you don't actually properly kill Firth to sort of destroy that opposing ideal of like Krill being one who wanted to return to ignorance but then understood the motivation and got angry about it and sought justice, while Firth learning a lesson, didn't want to return to ignorance but sort of played into it still, where he was just like, this ignorance, the way I know, must be the correct way. Didn't learn his lesson. So it doesn't like play into the thematic theme of killing him, of Krill being like, let's overcoming that. But then Firth dies anyway at the end, where you just sort of say hi to him and it's like, I don't know, I was like, oh, maybe we're going to do some sort of redemption, then just like something falls on him and crushes him. It's what I kind of mean by like, I get that's kind of what the game is going for. Like, it wants to tackle serious things and then also have comic moments like that. I think it does kind of undermine it a bit, but if that's what we're going for, that's totally fine. Like, it's not for me to judge. I take things too seriously, of course, anyway, so but yeah, it's probably done more moments like that, but you know, it's a bit hard to recall because there's been so many. I've played this game for like almost a year now or something, so it's hard to remember every single moment. But yeah, a lot of the game design is kind of cool. I think if I sat down and really thought about it, I think maybe some of it is a bit confusing how it sort of gels together. Like, why is there like a East Asian, like Japanese inspired like random town just randomly, and then nothing else is inspired by other or maybe other places inspired by different things. Like, I guess you can argue one of them is kind of like a New York sort of city place. It can be a bit on the nose, but I think it's trying to be on the nose, so that's kind of like the point. But yeah, but on the whole, I think it's a really good game. I think it's, I assume, a great foray into these sort of very difficult From Software challenge games. And does it make me want to play more of them? I think what it solidifies on me is I'm unsure still about them. If Dark Souls was basically running from boss to boss like Cuphead, fighting a boss, and that was it, I'd be like, yeah, I'm down for that. But it's not. It's a lot about exploration. It's a lot about being able to survive and find these different things in the first place, which I'm like, I think Another Crab's Treasure, you know, did confirm for me that it's like, I still don't love that style of gameplay, and that's okay. Not every style of gameplay needs to appeal to me. It's what I need to reiterate. So if you like it, more power to you. It's just for me, I was like, I know that this is not my sort of thing. So maybe I'll try Elden Ring, Dark Souls, equivalent games at some point. But I don't know when. I'll probably give it some space. Anyway, on the whole, I enjoyed the game. I really liked it, and I recommend you play it if you want like a difficult, challenging mechanical game, to be honest. But on that note, I think I'll round this episode off here. So, if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Socials, Discord down below. Hope to see each other again, but for now, it's our farewells. Until next time, bye-bye for now.